Hello, I'm Sophia Casper, and I'd like to welcome you to Tarot Fascination. Tarot Fascination was born out of my interest in, my love for, and my enduring fascination with tarot cards. Relatively speaking, I'm a newcomer to tarot, but in the last year or so, I've been able to do quite a lot of reading, studying, and learning about the tarot cards. Through these videos, I hope to share some of that knowledge with you, and I hope that it'll help you as well on your journey of exploring tarot cards. So let's dive in. How did I get started with tarot fascination, and how did my tarot fascination begin? Well, I remember years ago when I was a university student, a friend of mine showed me a deck of tarot cards, and I remembered feeling very enchanted looking at the tarot cards for the first time. I was really absorbed by the colors, the shapes, and the different images. And I felt like if I looked at them long enough, that these images, shapes, and colors could kind of tell me a story. This triggered a really deep curiosity in me. And when I looked at each card, I thought, what does this card mean overall? Why did the deck's creator or artist choose this specific image or these specific symbols? Because I could see on each card there were a lot of symbols. And I wondered, how did these images work together and create meaning, not only in one card, but if I'm looking at a reading of 3 or 5 or more cards, how do the images from card to card work together in a spread? And finally, personally, when I look at these cards, how do I interpret them? How are these images speaking to me? When I talk about tarot fascination and I talk about tarot cards in general, it's useful to look at just a little bit of history and as kind of background context to consider card games and suits and trick-taking games as a whole. So most everybody here is going to be familiar with your standard deck of playing cards. And the standard deck of cards has clubs, hearts, spades, and diamonds. And these suits, or kind of the background concepts of them, are also replicated in tarot decks. The clubs usually as wands, the hearts as cups, the spades as swords, and the diamonds as pentacles or discs. And you're familiar, I'm sure, with the ordered numbered cards, usually ace through 10, and then the court cards. And in a regular playing deck of cards, you usually have the jack, the queen, and the king. If you're like me, from childhood, you probably played some trick-taking games with your friends or your family. And trick-taking games, I think the first one I ever learned was War, or Crazy Eights, or Gin Rummy, or maybe you learned poker. Now, all of you are familiar, I'm sure, with the fact that in a trick-taking game, when two people put down cards, somebody's card is regarded as the higher card, and then that person gets to take the trick. And although basically, in a lot of games, for example, a 7 of hearts and a 7 of clubs would be the same rank. In many games, for example, like Pinochle or Bridge, I've heard, you have a trump suit, which means one suit is designated for that particular hand or for that particular game as being the higher card and for taking that trick. Now, historically, in Italy, there was developed a type of deck of cards called trionfi or triumph decks that introduced a 5th suit. So it was a trump suit, so that instead of having to designate for each game the specific suit of the 4 existing suits to decide, for example, clubs is going to be our trump suit. Instead of that, they had an entirely different suit that was designated as the Triumph suit that ranked above the other cards. Now, this built-in Triumph suit developed into the 22 cards that we recognize as the major arcana or the Triumph suit in the tarot cards as well. There are a lot of different ways of using tarot cards, but I wanted to mention the trick-taking type of use of a basic deck of cards because it's estimated that perhaps the first 350 years, tarot cards with the Triumph deck were actually used for trick-taking games. But nowadays, people use tarot cards in a lot of different ways. So beyond trick-taking games, you can use tarot cards basically for art appreciation. There are beautiful renderings of the 78 cards in over a lot of different decks, and many people enjoy looking at the cards just for their artwork. Of course, probably the most widespread popular conception is fortune-telling, is tarot cards as a fortune-telling tool for predicting the future. Cartomancy, but most of the people I know who are nowadays doing this would not define their reading and their work of tarot cards as fortune-telling per se. Most view it as a facilitation of a resolution to a problem. So if a reader comes to them and, if a person comes to them and wants to have their cards read, they often regard it more as a facilitation for the resolution of a problem rather than fortune telling. Apart from reading for other people, many people use tarot cards as a tool for personal transformation, and they feel it helps them gain deeper insight into life at a specific point in time. They may feel that it gives them glimpses into the individual and collective psyche through archetypal images. And some types of decks very, very specifically focus on that. For example, this is Robert Wang's Jungian Tarot. So going with this kind of approach, people may use tarot cards with the purpose of deepening the development of their own spirituality, kind of as a non-rational source of consciousness or bringing to light materials for the unconscious depths of self. Now, let me talk a little bit more about that. Many of you are probably familiar with the basic definition of an archetype. One source defines an archetype as a character type, a situation or action that is notably recurrent across the human experience, expressing universal patterns of human nature. This means basically that certain archetypal images or archetypal stories, people from various cultures and various times will recognize that as resonating in kind of something that they consider typical in life, typical in their lives and lives of people around them. Different tarot decks will represent each of the cards, and specifically I want to focus most on the first 22 cards in the Triumph deck, in the Trump deck that is often called the Major Arcana. And across decks, there will be many variations of a specific card. For example, card number 9, the Hermit, different artists will represent that in different ways. Not all of the hermits will look exactly alike. However, most variations of the same numbered card share core ideas of what that card means because the cards are linked to fundamental archetypes. Let's look at one example. I'd like to look at the example of the Empress. You can see it's one of my favorites. My background is the Empress from the Osho Zen Tarot here. The Empress is typically, especially following the traditions of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, will often look something like this. The Empress is usually a mother-like Empress figure with a crown of stars, seated in a natural setting with growing grain and wildlife around her. Now, this card is usually regarded as being symbolic of fertility, nature, life, and growth, and is often referred to as a Mother Nature figure or an Earth Mother figure or something like that. But across decks, however it is represented, and you can see these are three quite different representations of the Empress, the core meanings almost always still mean some variation of abundance, nurturing, femininity, fruitfulness, and creativity. So understanding the kind of original iconic images can help you understand variations across different decks. Let me tell you a little bit about my journey on tarot fascination and how I became so fascinated. Basically, when I started to learn a little bit about tarot, I felt like I had lots to learn. So I started reading a lot of books by recognized tarot experts. And you can see some of those people over here: Mary K. Greer, Barbara Moore, Rachel Pollack, Sally Nichols, Robert Place, Joan Bunning are just a few of them who are recognized as experts in the field. And there are so many good books out there that can offer information that's extremely helpful, not only to people like me who were just starting out, but by people who have worked with tarot for some time and want to keep delving deeper. I started studying the history, images, and symbols of each card, and that was incredibly helpful. But while I was studying, I was also working with the cards. I started doing readings for myself, readings for other people, listening to my intuition. And I found the more I learned, the more I wanted to share with other people. I am by profession a teacher, and I think it's built into my nature that the more I learn, the more I want to share. But this led me kind of back into a cyclical loop. I found that I still had a lot to learn. So then I went back to my books, and I keep going around this. This is what I call kind of my endless fascination with the cards. Now, with wanting to share that information, tarot fascination is my way to try to share this information with other people. The main part of tarot fascination is going to be presentations on the 22 cards of the major arcana from 0, the Fool, through 21, the World. I'm going to be sharing some of the information I've gathered from expert sources. And each one of my presentations on the 22 major arcana cards will include common ways that each card is usually interpreted. So I'll look at some of the archetypal images in that card. I'll look at that card in relationship to the sequence of cards around it. What cards come before it, what cards come after it, and how does it fit in? I'll be also looking at a historical view of how the card was represented in early versions. So some of the early versions, starting from, for example, the Visconti Sforza deck in the mid-1400s through the current time, but looking at the older versions, how was this card represented and how that evolved over time. I'll be spending a good deal of time looking at a deeper examination of the images and symbols on that card. And then, because I love to look at different decks and the variations through decks, I'll be looking at the card through a variety of different decks. That's what will be happening in my presentations on the 22 cards of the major arcana. However, I also will include some decks with kind of a bird's eye view of the tarot cards on a variety of topics. For example, I have one video on how to choose a good learner deck if you're just starting out. I will have some others on the background and history of tarot in general and a variety of other topics. Through Tarot Fascination, I'm hoping to share a little bit of the knowledge about things that I've learned. I hope that you will join me on this journey, and that I hope that these videos will help you become equally fascinated with these wonderful tarot cards, the 78 cards of the tarot deck. Welcome.